This is the Haulin Assets podcast where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority. Welcome to the Haulin Assets podcast. This is episode 98. I am Craig, your host. Over there, he is Chris.
The one and only.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm still here, doing pretty well.
Good. Yeah, your week's been okay?
It's been good, but it's been crazy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's been nuts. Like the last 2 weeks, it seems like just a whirlwind.
Well, let this podcast, Chris, be the calming center in the storm that is your life. Today, we are talking... You're not helping. Today, we are talking about February 2022 financials. But today, it's going to be kind of an expanded financials episode because there's a lot going on. Not just in the numbers, but in the world. And I knew before you ever told me what we were talking about today, I knew we were going to bring up fuel costs just because things are nuts right now.
It's insane.
So for people who are listening to this podcast, 60 years in the future, sorry. This is going to be pretty current, but
there's going to be a lot of good things that are going to be relevant even in the future. We will talk about what's going on right now, but near the end of the podcast, I want to talk a little bit about something that we've never talked about regarding profit and loss statements and a different way to kind of look at them, where you compare your expenses to your overall income. And this is going to be what's going on with all the fuel and everything is going to be a really good opportunity to kind of dive into that and really see how you can compare expenses with income and compare it to previous times. And, is this fuel spike really hurting us? Right.
And so in other words, this episode, we're going to get a little more nitty gritty into the numbers on the P&L. So to that end, people should go to haulinassetsllc.com to check out the full show notes and the attendant documentation.
Yep. There's going to be something new in the show notes.
Oh, what's that?
Regarding I'm going to do something really cool. I mean, you're going to love it. It's going to be awesome.
It's a spreadsheet, isn't it?
It is a spreadsheet. I'm going to do the profit and loss statement. I'm going to put it on as an Excel spreadsheet because of what we're going to talk about a little bit later on. This percentage of income, measuring your expenses based off a percentage of income is a really good tool to have in your belt. And so, stick around for the very end when we talk about this. We'll go into it in detail. It's a good thing to understand.
Okay. All right. Duly noted. So yeah, haulinassetsllc.com for all that documentation. Go to motorcarrierhq.com if you are just starting or thinking about starting your own trucking company. We'd love to see you there and have you chat with one of the what do you call them? Coaches, consultants?
Yep, coaches, business coaches.
There you go. All right, so Chris, let's get started. Do you want to talk about fuel up front, or do you want to kind of dive in the numbers first and then pull back and talk about?
Let's talk for a minute a little bit about fuel.
Okay.
We won't get into the specifics of this month, but I want to talk about fuel generally, what's going on right now, because it's insane.
It is. So as we're recording, as we're releasing this, it's March 16th, 2022. So just to give people a historical perspective, things have been climbing like crazy the last 2-3 weeks.
Yeah,
something like that.
2 weeks for sure. So we're just kind of entering the third week when Russia invaded Ukraine, which is just blows my mind where the logic behind this. I think this is going to put Russia back into the dark ages.
Well,
I think it's going to be bad for the entire country long term. But politics aside, bad decision. It's affecting the entire world right now, and the biggest area where it seems to be, affecting people outside of Ukraine, where they're fighting for their lives. And man, what they're doing there is just so inspirational. It's hard to watch, but it's neat at the same time to see people fighting for their freedoms the way they have been.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's caused fuel prices to just go nuts. To put in perspective, we went essentially in this last week, we went from spending about $8,000 a month or a week in fuel for all 5 of our trucks that are running, to last week we spent over $13,250.
Smokes, that's like a 60% increase almost.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
And you know why I know
incredible.
that number, 13,250?
Because it's huge.
It's big, and it's exactly what our credit limit was. On our fuel line. And
You're pushing it.
our credit, the way our fuel card, the fuel line that we've got works is you run on credit for a week and then it pays off once a week.
Right.
And, resets. Well, guess what happened Sunday? We completely run out of that $13,200.50 of credit. And so we're
Amazing.
scrambling, trying to, make sure our drivers can pay for their fuel. And it was just a little bit of a mess. And it's just one of those things you think, we've typically had a good $4,000 or $5,000 cushion
right
on that account. And then all of a sudden it's gone in 1 week. It kind of caught us off guard.
Is that something you're able to make a call to the bank about, or whoever's holding that card?
Not on a Sunday night.
Yeah, well, okay, good point. Yeah, good point. So what'd you do?
Well, in my situation, I'm a little bit lucky. So we did a couple things. Sunday night, we had one driver that had to fuel Sunday night, and that driver just used a credit card, which is not the best way to do it, but
right.
We can at least get fuel in the truck. And then Monday morning, and this puts me in a little bit more of a unique situation than most people. I've got a factoring company that can transfer,
right.
that kind of we've got a fuel card that's tied to the factoring company, so I could have somebody just transfer money onto that fuel card easy. Most people aren't going to have necessarily that easy of a time doing that.
Right.
So be smarter than us. And when fuel prices are changing that quickly, just watch, what either that credit limit or the balance that you've got on your fuel card or whatever it is, because it went fast.
So in that case, yeah, because it's hard to be reactive. Like you said, it's Sunday night. There's nothing you can do. You can't call anybody about it. So for somebody in your position, the company's been in place for almost 3 years now. You've run a lot of loads. You've got 5 trucks on the road. So you've built up, presumably, some goodwill. Could you, when you see the writing on the wall, okay, now there's this invasion happening, there's the kibosh on Russian energy, et cetera, et cetera. So you looking at the writing on the wall, fuel prices are probably going to go up. Would you recommend that people then proactively call whoever's holding that fuel card and say, hey, can we bump this up just in case things
Absolutely.
go haywire?
I wish we would have done that. And I think we probably would have been okay doing that. I mean, the fuel card companies see that happening, and they, we've had a good record with them, never missed any payments, never bounced any payments, anything like that. So I think we probably could have done that pretty easily. So here's a couple changes that we're doing to try to make this so it doesn't happen again. We've got a secondary fuel card that we can put money on, and this is the one that we transfer the money into, where we can essentially put money on and just kind of have in a reserve. So, if we throw a few $1,000s into that account, just have it sitting there in case we run out on the credit account. It's good to go. So we've done that. The second thing we do is we ask for a credit limit increase. And then the third thing we've done, and this is actually going to have the biggest impact, instead of just drafting once a week from our checking account to pay off the credit line, we're going to have them start doing it 2 times a week.
Oh, okay.
And the biggest thing is, this is probably, if I had to do things all over again, so everybody kind of take note of this, you can pick which day of the week you want that to draft and reset. We picked Tuesday. I can't remember why. I just kind of pulled it out of the air probably. And so ours drafts on Tuesday. I think you should do it on Friday.
I was just going to say,
resets for the weekend, so you don't have to worry about the weekend. Because solving problems like getting more money onto your fuel card on a weekend is a lot harder to do than it is during the week. And so we're actually going to have them draft it twice a week. Still stay with the Tuesday, but then also draft on Friday, so that that essentially kind of doubles our credit line.
Right. Yeah, at least doubles your wiggle room within your credit line.
And like I've talked about in the past, we talked a few episodes ago, one of our initiatives is to have $15,000 per truck in our checking account, which we do. And so, you don't make any interest on money in your checking account. So just having that draft twice a week instead of once a week really doesn't make any difference.
Right. It's just
us.
putting your money to work.
It puts our money to work, and it kind of gives us a little bit of peace of mind, knowing that it's less likely that we're going to run into that kind of an issue again.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you mentioned that we are going to use fuel costs and other expenses as a way to look at what'd you say, as a percentage of your income, and how to look at that in more detail. We're going to get into that, but I think first we should probably talk about the actual February numbers for the road, and then dive in a little deeper.
Let's jump into it. Yep.
Okay, so February 2022, how was it? This is before the world blew up, right?
For the most part, yeah. I think if I remember, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head. I think Russia invaded Ukraine somewhere around the 24th of February, 26th maybe.
Yeah.
So right at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So yeah, February wasn't really affected at all by that decision.
So how was the month? How'd it go?
It was a good month. The good year continues. We had all 5 trucks running for most of the month. The 5th truck started sometime right around the 10th of February. So we didn't have 5 running for the full month, but for most of the month. Mm-hmm. And so that was good to see 5 trucks going well.
Okay. So total miles run off of 4.5 trucks.
I'm going to do something I haven't had to do before.
What's that?
And this is another story of, man, things are weird right now.
Okay.
I had to estimate our miles for the month.
Oh.
I didn't have an exact number because truck number 5, when we ordered the ELD, the ELD comes, it's a little black box that sits on the dash, but then it's got a cable that connects to the computer system in the truck.
Yeah.
And they gave us the wrong cable.
Oh boy.
And so we had to have our driver that took over truck number 5, Greg, he had to run on paper logs for about a week, maybe 10 days, that first trip. While it was out.
Shout out Greg. Welcome to the company.
Greg. Well, no, Greg's been with us for a while. He transitioned he went from the truck 1 that I drove to, we put him in the new truck 5.
Got it.
So I'm pretty sure, I'm confident that we're within a couple hundred miles here. So it's close. It's immaterial, the difference that it would have been. But 48,682 miles.
Wow. Okay. So 48. I'm doing math live, Chris. Never do math live. But yeah. So I think with that 5th truck starting on the 10th, that seems about right.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yep. With 5 trucks, you'd want to be between 55 and 60 for a full month.
Yep. God, so look at you with all these numbers and math on the fly. You're doing pretty well. You've learned this stuff.
So I know, right? Yeah. It's only been 2.5 years, Chris. So with that in mind, February is a short month anyway. Plus the truck wasn't on the road the full month. So yeah, that seems like about the right amount of miles we'd be shooting for.
Yep.
Okay, good. So of that, Deadhead was okay.
Deadhead was okay. It was 3,453 miles, which is still good, but it's a little higher than it has been. The last several months we've been hovering closer to 5%, so it's a bit of a jump.
So this is how many? What's the percentage on that?
7%.
7%. Okay,
and we've been closer to 5 the last little bit.
All right, all right. So that brought in a total revenue number of.
Drum roll. We're hitting a new record. And it kind of blows me away. It was higher than I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
$162,139.10.
Okay. Pause for the applause sound effect that maybe I'll put in there later. I don't know. No, that sounds great. So yeah, new record. What was the previous record? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it was closer to 140, 145, something.
Oh, wow. So it really
that's a pretty good jump.
Blew that old record out of the water. I guess that's what happens when you add a new truck, Chris.
Yeah.
And okay, so the all-in rate per mile company-wide was
$3.33 a mile, which is definitely better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I'll say, especially for February, right?
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
That's a really great one. So, before we get into the what the profit realized was and all that stuff, that 333 number, the rate per mile, do you expect that to hold with all this turmoil going on, or do you expect that to dip?
I honestly think it's probably the 333. I expect it's probably going to increase a little bit because of the fuel price. Whether it's 333, if you take the average of what it's been over the last 6 months, I think the average is going to go up just because of fuel prices.
Right.
I mean, they've gone up so much that it usually takes a little while for the freight market to adjust to rising fuel prices, especially when they've increased as fast as they have. So it may take a few more weeks before that happens, but we'll learn how to see if that's happening. That's one of the things we're going to talk about with this percentage of expense thing we've mentioned like 50 times now.
It's called a professional tease, Chris.
Yeah,
okay,
we've done it a lot.
Yeah, it's if only it were for something, sexier than expense
P&L
reports.
and expense reports. That's not sexy.
I'm sure we could find some way that P&L is a horrible acronym.
You're making me feel bad. I thought it was sexy.
All right, Chris. Well, before we get to that, let's talk about profit. What was the profit realized for February?
It was $48,286.79. Another record.
Another record. Yeah, yep. I was just going to say that's pretty high.
Pretty good month.
Looking good. Okay, so that number, did that number surprise you in the way that the rate per mile did?
It did, and a lot of because before, like I when I go through the P&L, like and I go and I do all my reconciliations in my accounts, and then I pull the profit and loss statements, and I'll kind of just go through it line item by line item. And before, so I'm doing that before I've seen the net income number. And so I'm going through everything and I'm looking at some of the expenses that we had come through this month. And I'm thinking, oh, this may not be as good as I thought it was going to be. And so by the time I got to the bottom of it and saw that $48,000 number, I was like, whoa, that surprises me. So a lot of it has to do because the rate per mile was so good. That's a big reason why it's high, despite some of the expenses that we had come through that we'll talk a little bit about some of them here in a second.
Yeah. All right. Very good. So, is there anything else from those specific numbers that you want to pull out, or should we start diving a little bit deeper like we've been promising over and over?
Yeah, let's dive into those numbers. We'll go through the P&L, and then we'll go to what we've been teasing.
So let's get into some of the numbers from that P&L then. We've talked about, obviously we've talked about the income, we talked about the profit realized, but what are some of the specific expenses or other numbers that you want to pull out?
So there's about 5 or 6 of them here. The marketing and advertising expense. So some of this stuff has to do with bringing truck number 5 on. So you usually on our profit and loss statement, you don't see that marketing and advertising category because we're not doing a lot of marketing and advertising. This was the signage for the truck and the trailer.
Oh, okay.
For truck number 5.
Just so a single truck and a single trailer, you wanted to put some signage up on that.
Yeah,
How
so
much
it's just the Haulin Assets, the logo, everything. It was $1,100, little over $1,100.
Man.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
They're not cheap.
Those vinyl lettering, and
probably could have got a discount if you'd put my face on there. But they've been like, oh, it's such a pleasure to put this on the truck that
I think we would have been charged triple. Personally, but
what
do I know?
A little over $1,100 then to do the signage on truck and trailer 5. This is on all 5 trucks now. Then they're uniform.
On all 5. Yeah, no, they're not uniform. Truck number, well, the logo is the same, but truck number 1 that had that the nice trailer wrap, we haven't. Those are really expensive.
Oh, okay.
So we haven't done that again.
Okay, so all right, that's good to know. I think I sent you a text. A buddy of mine spotted one of your trucks going down the road. I need to send you that picture. So I should say to everybody else who's watching and listening, if you spot a Haulin Assets truck on the road, and it's safe to do so, or maybe you're at a truck stop or something, just snap a photo and send it our way. We'd love to.
I love to see those. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
It's fun.
Catch one of our guys out in the wild.
That's right.
Making money.
You'll need a big net. Okay. All right. So what other numbers do you want to pull out?
The dispatch and factoring fee was bigger than normal, and this I didn't notice this when I did January's numbers, but there were some of the charges came through and were dated in January or in February that should have been attributed to January.
Oh.
And I didn't want to, normally, like if I was just doing the books for myself, I would have gone back and adjusted those dates. But where I've already published the January numbers, I didn't want to backdate those because that would have messed up what I'd put out to everybody else before, and I get people calling up and say, hey, you said you made this much money in January, now it only shows this much. And
right.
So just to try to keep things even, January was a little higher than it should have been.
Higher expense-wise or revenue-wise?
It was
or profit-wise?
Higher. It was profit-wise because there should have been some more expenses that are now in February that should have been in January.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that you kind of post-dated your expenses, and February should have been even more profitable than it turned out to be.
Yes.
It was a record month that would have broken the record even harder.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's good to know.
Yep.
All right. So that's cool. Anything else on dispatch and factoring, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I kind of want to skip the next one because it's fuel and just yikes. It was just bad.
Everybody knows.
It was high.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about that already. Yeah. Okay. So what else? What other line items you want to go through?
There was a bump in truck insurance for adding truck number 5.
Sure,
we basically had to pay a little bit of a down payment, and the way our insurance renewal works is we renew in April. And so we actually, when we added that truck in February, we just had to pay the full, what was left just for that truck through April.
Oh, okay.
So basically, what is that? 2 months worth of,
right.
Basically February and March is.
So you're
for it.
Essentially trying to get all of your trucks on the same renewal schedule.
Yeah, and that's how it always works. If you add a truck the last day of your policy, you only pay for 1 day's worth.
Okay. All right. Okay. So your policy covers any future trucks that you bring on. So the theme I'm sensing here as we go through these line items is basically anytime you add a new truck, it's going to add a crap load of expenses on that month's P&L.
Well, not just that month. If you remember right, the last 3 P&L episodes we've talked about, there's been little things that we've been purchasing along the way for truck number 5. And so there, the ELD, I think we purchased in December or January, and there's been the tools and some of the stuff that you've got to put in the truck. We've been just kind of over the last 3 months or so getting ready for it and buying some of that stuff.
Right. But then, and when the truck comes in, or when you start the process of purchasing the truck, that you have to go through the loan and doing all the expenses associated with the loan? When does that all come into play?
Great lead into the next thing that we're going to talk about.
Look at me, Chris. I'm a pro.
You are a pro. Most of the loan stuff happens right when you take the truck.
Okay.
Right when you get delivery of it. It takes a while to get everything all ready to go, but the expense of it typically comes at the time that you take delivery.
Got it.
So in this situation, one of our biggest expenses was a loan origination fee. We had to pay the bank essentially the loan origination fee for the truck and trailer. And that was $3,332.30. I put this under interest.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
No, that is not cheap.
Yeah, when you're basically a $250,000 loan for a truck and a trailer.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So that just I put under interest expense. And so the interest expense this month is a lot higher than normal, and that's why.
So is that loan origination fee, is that cash out, or did they roll that into the loan for the truck?
You can do it.
I'm thinking of like home loans, something else comparably huge, right?
You can do it either way. In this situation, we just paid it.
You had it, so you might as well pay it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Otherwise, you're paying, if you roll it into the loan, then you're going to be paying interest on that as well. And
right. And nobody wants to do that.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So, anything else on the loan side of it, the bank side of things?
Not the loan side, but now that we're talking about interest, this kind of got me, one of the common questions that I get from people all the time, it got me thinking about this question when I was going through the interest piece is, why doesn't your truck and trailer payment show up on your profit and loss statement?
That's actually a great question. I've never thought to ask it.
It is a good question, and it doesn't. It does, but it doesn't.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode. Now that everything's clear.
I'm going to try to break it down and make it a little bit more clear.
Okay.
So if you think about it, whenever you make a payment on a loan, a term loan, so like a term loan would be something that, it's for a certain amount and it's going to be paid off in a certain period of time.
Right. Car loans and home loans are usually term loans.
Yep, exactly. And so there's always at least 2 aspects of every term loan. And that is a principal piece of the payment and an interest piece of the payment.
Right.
And that changes over time. When your balance is really high on the loan, like when you first get it, you're going to pay a lot more of that payment goes to interest, and less of it goes to principal. As you get closer to having it paid off, because the balance is so low, you're paying less of interest and more onto the principal. And so if you take that interest and principal piece of that payment, let's just for an example, say you've got $1,000 payment. Obviously a truck payment is going to be higher than that. Ours are I'll use ours as an example. Our payments for a new truck and a trailer, the loans it's combined. And so it's one loan for the truck and one loan for the trailer. It's the same loan. They're both in that same loan. And the payments on average for the new trucks and trailers that we're getting is about $3,700 a month.
Okay.
And roughly $700 of it is going to interest right now because the loan balances are high. They're pretty new loans. And about $3,000 of it is going to principal. And so on what's going to show up on your profit and loss statement is just that interest piece because it's an expense. It's money that's going out the door that you're not getting.
Whereas the principal is going toward an asset that you retain.
Yeah, and you're paying off a balance of a loan.
Right.
And so it's not an expense. It seems like an expense, but it's really not because you're paying off a loan. Where the expense comes in, and this is one thing like I've toyed with doing, I just haven't ever really got around to doing it. And this would actually give us a little bit more accurate depiction of our profit and loss. And so someday I hope to kind of get my act together and do it, is you with any asset, especially a fixed asset like a truck, you do a depreciation because it loses value over time, right?
Right.
And that depreciation over time is going to offset that principal. And so you've got an expense. And so the way that I do it right now is because I haven't really taken the time to go and do a monthly depreciation schedule. At the end of the year when my accountant does my taxes, he takes that whole depreciation expense at the end of the year rather than spreading it out monthly.
Right.
And that would be, if we did a depreciation expense on a monthly basis, that would show up on the profit and loss statement.
I see. Okay. But instead, you're just doing it yearly.
I'm just doing it yearly
so
right now.
it really just shows up on your taxes, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I do a profit and loss statement at the end of the year, after my accountant has gone and done everything, it will show that. And so that's kind of that depreciation expense basically would account for the principal portion of your truck payment.
Right. Well, Chris, I think it's time. I think our professional tease has come to a head. It's time to talk about expenses. What was it? Expenses as a percentage of income, which, is like spreadsheets themselves is an awfully sexy phrase. But expenses as a percentage of income. Why do you want to talk about this concept? Let's intro it that way. Because
so as I was talking, they were thinking about fuel and fuel expenses this month. I wanted to see how it compared with past months, not just from a strictly dollar amount, because I know the fuel expense has gone up quite a bit. Like you see the actual dollar amount, but what does that mean? Is it hurting my business? Is it not hurting my business? And so one way that you can see that is through your comparing it as a percentage of your income. And so what you basically do is you take any expense, and so we're going to talk mostly about fuel right now, but you take any expense, and let's say in this situation, let's say we've got $20,000 in the month in fuel.
Okay.
And our total income, our revenue was $100,000.
20% of your revenue.
Yeah. So basically what it is, you take that $20,000, you divide it by $100,000, the total income, and that gives you 20%.
Right.
And so our fuel expense was 20% of our income. And so one way to look at this is you go back and you compare month after month. You go back and you look at the last 6 months and say, hey, how's it changed? So I actually did that. And so let's talk about actual numbers, and we can use this as an example. So the first thing I did is I went and looked at, if you remember the first year of operation, we did an episode that we talked about everything on the first year. So I went and pulled, got that profit and loss statement, looked at it again. And I should have wrote down the hard numbers too. I don't have them. But in that first year, our percentage of fuel to our income was 25.3%.
Okay. So first year, 25.3. All right.
Yep.
So that's our benchmark.
That is one of the benchmarks. Yes, benchmark. Absolutely. And then in October of last year, so October 2021, it was 23.3%.
A little lower.
Okay. In November, it was 25.8%.
A little higher.
Yep. In December, it was 19.3%.
Ooh.
So it dropped quite a bit.
And so that's as a percentage of income, which may not be about fuel costs. It may be about the rates that you're getting in December.
Yeah. So
being
there's
so much higher.
There's
Right.
a bunch of different factors. Yep.
Right.
If your freight rates go higher and your fuel essentially costs stay about the same, it's going to affect that number. How people drive is going to affect it. If you're an owner operator, the bigger your fleet is, the more accurate this number is going to be. Like you take, for example, if you're an owner operator and you've only got one truck, you're fueling one time, you're fueling that one truck. But if you fuel it, say it gets a tank of fuel on the first of the month, and then it gets another tank on the very last of the month, you probably have an extra tank of fuel in that month's profit and loss statement, which when you're talking about one truck and one extra tank, that can easily move this number 5%.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to look and see why the number's the way that it is too a little bit. So for December, where it dropped that much, revenue was high. Guys took a decent amount of time off for Christmas. And so we didn't spend quite as much as in the fuel expense number was a little bit lower. And so I kind of throw that one off to the side. A lot of times when you're comparing numbers, you want to throw the highest number out and you want to throw the lowest number out because they're typically anomalies.
Right.
And then look at the more like what's in the middle.
Statistics 101, Chris.
There you go.
I didn't take that class. Sorry.
So in January, it was 24.9. And then in February, it was 22.45.
Okay.
So for the most part, we've been in that mid 23-ish%, kind of averaging right around there.
Does this track with other companies, other trucking companies that you work with? Does that seem like it's about right? Does it seem like you guys are even more efficient than normal or less?
It's pretty close. And that's another really good point, is that's another way that this percentage-based system is really good to compare, because you can kind of compare your little trucking company to one of the biggest trucking companies in the world, because if you just are comparing what is my percentage of expense for fuel compared to XYZ's company percentage of fuel, you can kind of see it's a great way to compare way different sized companies. Yeah. And it's more of an apples to apples comparison.
This is really interesting. Actually, it's funny. I've been working with a dental accountant, and dentist offices have it's very not strict or rigid, but it's like really consistent expenses as a percentage of income. And I wonder, Chris, maybe that would be a good thing for us to look at in the future, is like diving into what your typical expense ratios would be for a company, whether it's fuel costs or insurance costs or whatever.
I need to do a little bit better research on this, but this would make a really good podcast episode at some point. Like, what are the industry averages?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then if we can figure out what the industry averages are, then we can, kind of help people a little bit better understand how they're doing.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, so cool. Where do you want to take this now? Now that I've got the concept of what you were talking about, and we've talked about it with fuel, is there anywhere else you want to go with this idea?
So we've already touched on some of these a little bit, but let's talk about why this is helpful. One, like I said, you can compare different sized companies to each other pretty accurately. Mm-hmm. Another good way is to find trends. And so, where we see in February, where like that last week of February, it's really started happening in March. So March is going to be the month we're going to want to look at it and say, okay, we spent 22.45% of our fuel expense. It was 22.45% of our total income. Is that good or bad? And so February is that. Let's see what it looks like in March. And then if we see it shoot up, we've got a problem. But if you see freight rates increase quite a bit to compensate for that, and your percentage stays the same, you're like, it has increased, but I'm making a little bit more money to offset it.
Right.
So it's not a big deal. And usually it takes some time for the freight market to catch up to the fuel market. So my suspicion is, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, but my suspicion is in March, we'll see that number increase. But in April and May, we'll probably see it kind of come back closer to normal, to that mid-20s range.
Yeah, could be a good thing keep track of.
If it stays higher there, then we're going to have an issue, and that's something that we're going to want to keep our eyes on. We may want to start to get a little bit more disciplined with our fuel. We may want to watch some other things because we know that's going to have a big effect on our profit margins if that percentage gets way out of whack.
So it sounds like a lot of work to keep track of this stuff and to do all these comparisons. I mean, you're talking about, spreadsheets and historical comparisons and all that stuff. Is it difficult to figure this stuff out, or do you have any shortcuts, any ways people can go about it?
It's not difficult, and there's a couple different ways you can go about it. Depending on your accounting system, it can be super easy. Like QuickBooks has when you pull a profit and loss statement, there's a drop-down menu that's, let's see if I've got it written down here somewhere. I think I do, but I can't see it right now. But it basically says compare like to previous period or something like that. You hit that drop-down menu, and one of the check marks is percentage of income. You just check that, and it will show your hard numbers like it normally has, and then it will show that percentage in a column right next to it.
Okay.
And so the profit and loss statement that I put on the website in the show notes this time has that. I've never put that on there before, but it has it this time. So you can see not just what our fuel percentage was, but our expenses based, for all the other categories as well.
There you go. All right. So very good. And again, people can go check that out at HaulinAssetsLLC.com. That's HaulinAssetsLLC.com.
And another way you can do it, if you're doing your profit and loss statements on an Excel spreadsheet, or if you've got some other kind of accounting system that doesn't do it, but will let you export it to Excel, or if you just enter everything into Excel, you can just do the formula yourself. It's pretty easy. It's just, again, it's taking that expense, dividing it by the total income. And so, I'll get really nerdy here for just 1 second.
I'm so excited.
When you do the spreadsheets, you can copy and paste formulas. It gets really easy. You don't have to do all of them, but make sure you can use some dollar signs, and Google this if you don't know how to do it. But if you put dollar signs in front of the column letter and the row number, it will hold that column. So you want to do that on the income one. So, because you're going to be using the income for every expense that you divide by. Right. So in our situation, $20,000 of fuel divided by $100,000 in income.
Right.
If it's $30,000 in payroll expenses divided by that $100,000 is the same every time. And so you can put those dollar signs in the formula, and then you can copy and paste it all throughout the rest of the formulas. And it's easy to do. You just kind of have to know how to do it. And I know I haven't explained it super well. Your eyes are glossing over.
Everybody wake up. Okay. I'm taking Chris away from his spreadsheets. So
it's very doable. It's one of those things I can't really teach you how to do it over the air, but you can Google it, learn how to freeze a formula. I mean, it's not super hard to do once you kind of learn how to do it.
Well, there you go. All right. So
YouTube videos.
Oh man, YouTube.
You can learn anything on YouTube.
It's amazing, right? It's the single greatest college ever.
Yep.
Okay, Chris. So with the idea of expenses as a percentage of income, is there anything else that you want to talk about with this today before we turn this into a full episode later?
No, I think that's good. I put for the first time our profit and loss statement in an Excel form on the website, so you can download it and you can kind of play around with it if you want to. And most accounting softwares you can export in either a PDF, which is what I usually put on the site, or an Excel. So you can look at both of those in the show notes.
Very nice. All right, Chris. Well, I think that is our impact tip for the day, if I'm not mistaken. It was a long impact tip, but it was all about how to figure out expenses as a percentage of income. So hopefully people will go check that out. Follow Chris's really detailed, exact advice about how to freeze your formulas. And if you do that, your business is guaranteed to succeed, right, Chris?
Well, I wouldn't go quite that far.
Oh, okay.
It's a good tool to use, for sure.
No, so appreciate everybody listening. Make sure you go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com to check out all those, the full show notes and all the sexy spreadsheets and whatnot. Make sure you go to motorcarrierhq.com to chat with one of the coaches there. And Chris, I think we're good. Shall we?
Yeah, that was a good episode.
Okay.
I liked it because it's nerdy stuff.
It was exceptionally this was an exceptionally Chris episode today.
I'm glad you had your hair down for this episode.
If it had been up, it would have been too tight. It would have cut off circulation in my brain. I
lighten things up a little bit.
Couldn't have done that fast math. So, all right, everybody, thanks for listening. We will see you next time.
See ya.